Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar series. This month and next month is a little bit different. We are going to be having kind of a mini series. So DHS was gracious enough to say that they have a lot of people reaching out with various questions and case studies that they are curious about on various topics. And so they decided this would be a perfect avenue to kind of see what's out there, the interest in people, and give little tidbits here and there of just small clippets of different topics. So today we're going to be focusing on PFAS. So please remember to have yourself on mute. And then towards the end, when we do open up the forum a little bit more, then you can come off of mute and talk as well. I will turn it over to Jackie to do our introductions.
Thanks, Deanna. So I'm Jackie Cronin. I work with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and we have a new program called the Environmental Health Capacity Program. And so we are trying to host this two-part mini series. And today we have our toxicology fellow, Lily Gonzalez Vasquez. She's a fellow in the Department of Health Services with us here in Madison. And part of her work in the department involves collaborating with other toxicologists as well as technical staff to review groundwater and drinking water standards. And she's also a key part of our environmental health capacity grant, working on addressing nitrate in drinking water as part of that grant. So with that, we will get started. Thanks, Lily.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie, for that intro. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lily Gonzalez, and today I am going to be presenting on the health risks of PFAS and what the Department of Health Services, or DHS, is doing to protect its citizens from these contaminants. So what are PFAS? Well, PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And they are a family of man-made chemicals that contain carbon, fluorine, and other elements. Now, to provide a more specific description of what PFAS are, they are characterized by a carbon chain, as shown here, and they're usually bonded to fluorine atoms. And some of these PFAS can also contain a functional group, which could either be a carboxylic acid or a sulfonic acid functional group at the end of their chain. But not all of these functional groups will be carboxylic acid or sulfonic acid groups. There are newer PFAS that are different. However, these structures are pretty much the basis of the different chemical properties that pretty much influence the behavior of different types of PFAS. Now, PFAS have been used in many products since the 1950s, and in general, there are nearly 5,000 types of PFAS, some of which have been more widely studied than others. Now, the most common use of PFAS have been in aqueous film-forming foams, or as we better know them as firefighting foams. But you can also find PFAS in different places or products, such as in food containers or fast food wrappers, grease-resistant paper. So anything related to fast food restaurants, you can find these fast food wrappers. But other places that you can also use PFAS in is in water-resistant clothing and also in nonstick cookware. And the reason that PFAS are so widely used is because, or were widely used, is because they are resistant to grease, oil, water, and heat, which make them really, really useful for these purposes. But how can we be exposed to PFAS? Well, people can be exposed to PFAS in several ways. One of the ways that we can be exposed to PFAS is through food. So food that has been packaged in PFAS containing materials, or food that has been processed with equipment that use PFAS, or even food that has been grown in PFAS contaminated soil or water. And just to provide some examples of these types of foods, research has shown that they have detected PFAS in fish. They've also detected PFAS, different types of PFAS in eggs, even in crops and in grains. So that means that PFAS can be found in living organisms, including fish and even other animals that are consumed by humans. But other ways that we can be exposed to PFAS is through commercial household products. And this can include stain-resistant products and fabric and carpets. And last but not least, we can also be exposed to PFAS through drinking water. And this is a major concern because potential exposures to PFAS can often be associated with historical contamination of surface and groundwater. So why do we care about PFAS? They're everywhere, there are a lot of them, and we can be exposed to them. So why do we care? Well, studies among people have shown that high levels of PFAS can cause negative health effects. And some of these health effects, when we become exposed to high levels of PFAS, can include increased cholesterol levels. It can also lead to reduction in antibody response to vaccines. And other studies have also found evidence that there is impaired fertility in women that have been exposed to PFAS. In addition to these health effects, PFAS can also increase the risk of other diseases, such as thyroid disease, also osteoarthritis, ulcerative colitis, and even different types of cancers. But as further studies on PFAS become readily available, we are continuing to learn more about their health effects. But now moving on, PFAS have also been found in many of Wisconsin's natural resources. And to provide more context on this, there are more than 70 PFAS sites in Wisconsin, and those 70 PFAS sites are represented by these yellow dots on the map. And this map can be found in the DNR website. And so this is an updated map of known PFAS sites in Wisconsin as of February 2022. So really not too long ago. Now, the next big question is, if PFAS are everywhere, and there are a lot of them, they cause negative health effects, then what is the state of Wisconsin doing to protect its citizens from these contaminants? Well, specifically, DHS works to protect the health and safety of Wisconsinites from conventional and emerging contaminants, such as PFAS. And the state does this in several ways. For PFAS, we do this by, one, developing recommended groundwater standards. We also do this by reviewing and approving fish consumption advisories. And we also do this by evaluating health hazards from PFAS sites. So, as I mentioned, one of the ways that the state is protecting you from PFAS is by developing groundwater standards. And the reason that we do this is because 2/3 of Wisconsin residents use groundwater as their drinking water source. So that's close to 66–67%. And groundwater standards, they protect public health by limiting the amount of harmful substances that can be discharged to groundwater in Wisconsin. Now, the process for developing these groundwater standards begins with the Department of Natural Resources, or DNR, where DNR identifies substances that are or may be in groundwater that may be of concern. And once these substances have been identified, the DNR requests DHS to review these substances. And then DHS is responsible for developing these recommended standards. And once DHS recommends these standards, they finally send them to DNR to promulgate those standards or to propose those rules. Now, in terms of how DHS develops these recommended standards, we do follow certain steps. One of them is we do gather scientific information and perform critical literature review. From there, we then select appropriate standards based on the toxicity data. And then we document and share those findings to DNR. Now, currently, DHS has developed recommended groundwater standards for 18 PFAS. And we use these standards to evaluate potential health risks in communities. Moving on, another way the state is protecting you from PFAS is through the development of fish consumption advisories. Now, people can be exposed to PFAS by consuming fish. And these fish consumption advisories, they are basically warnings for people when fish are unsafe to eat. So if fish is contaminated with contaminants such as PFAS or mercury or PCBs, these advisories are then issued when humans face these potential threats from eating the fish. Now, in terms of PFAS, these contaminants, they can persist in fish for long periods and they can tend to bioaccumulate, meaning that older fish are likely to have higher concentrations of PFAS. So for this reason, to limit the amount of exposure of a contaminant like PFAS, the DNR specifically can set fish consumption advisories to help reduce contaminant exposure. And the way that they do this is by basing it off of scientific literature on how much fish meals should be consumed per week or per month. Currently, Wisconsin only has set fish consumption advisories for PFOS, which is a type of PFAS. So for this reason, I am going to focus on explaining how this fish consumption advisory for PFOS was calculated. So to set these advisories for PFOS, we first determined the maximum concentration at various meal rates. So to do this, as I mentioned, DNR did go into the literature and performed a critical literature review. And they found a reference dose that was specific to PFOS, which I will not mention the value here, but there is a reference dose for PFOS that was used. And once they had inputted this reference dose, they multiplied this by the average body weight of an adult, which in this case, we used 70 kilograms. And then we divided that by the daily fish consumption rate in order to get the maximum concentration, in this case of PFOS, that would be safe to consume at a given consumption rate. So once we obtain this value here, we then use these maximum concentrations to set meal thresholds. Now, for PFOS, as I mentioned in this case, if the concentration in fish is 10 micrograms per kilogram or less, then you can consume the fish and it's unrestricted. In terms of PFOS in fish that might be between 10 to 15 micrograms per kilogram, then the meal frequency is restricted to 1 meal per week. If it's between 50 to 200 micrograms per kilograms, then the meal frequency is restricted to 1 meal per month. But anything that is above 200 micrograms per kilogram of PFOS in fish, then the consumption advisory is to not eat the fish at all. But in general, following the statewide fish advisory that I just showed you will greatly help reduce PFAS exposure, especially or specifically for PFOS. However, There are other water bodies within Wisconsin that do have PFOS specific advisories. For example, in this slide, I am showing a list of the different sites or water bodies that contain PFOS specific advisories. So they do not necessarily follow the fish consumption advisories that I just explained earlier. So in terms of Lake Superior, I will be using Lake Superior as an example. Fish consumption advisories can vary by the different species. So here I am showing a graph, and on this y-axis, you have different fish species that are found in Lake Superior. And on this x-axis, you have the concentration of PFOS that have been detected in these different fish species. So in the case of Cisco lake trout and Siskiyou lake trout, there are no restrictions in terms of how much of these fish species you can consume. However, when you go to bloater chubs and lake whitefish, they found relatively higher PFOS levels. So they have limited consumption of these fish species to 1 meal per week. And then for rainbow smelt, they found significantly higher PFOS levels. So in this case, they have limited consumption to 1 meal per month. Now, to kind of switch gears a little bit, the last thing that I do want to mention is that the state also protects you from PFAS through the site evaluation program. And the purpose of the site evaluation program is to evaluate chemical spills and contaminated sites across the state of Wisconsin. And so to do this, they conduct health risk assessments at known and potential contamination sites. In addition to that, the site evaluation program also is involved in addressing community health concerns. In addition to that, the site evaluation program also helps support the EPA. It supports DNR, local health departments, and even communities on various chemical contamination sites across the state of Wisconsin. In addition to what the state does to protect us, there are also several ways that you can also take action to reduce PFAS exposure. And some of these actions can include vacuuming and dusting regularly to reduce dust, following Wisconsin's fish consumption advisories, rinsing off after swimming and avoiding contact with foam, avoid using PFAS impacted water for drinking, preparing beverages, and foods that take up a lot of water, and avoiding using PFAS impacted water for watering produce gardens. So in summary, people can be exposed to PFAS through several ways. PFAS can cause health effects in people. And the Wisconsin Department of Health Services is working to protect residents from PFAS through the development of groundwater standards, fish consumption advisories, and the site evaluation program. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them as well.
Yeah, so we will open the floor up to all of you. We may or may not also have some of these site evaluation program staff on that maybe they can chime in and tell us a little bit as well. So if anyone is brave enough to come off of mute, otherwise you can also ask any questions in the chat box. Do we have any of our site evaluation program staff that has anything that they would like to add of kind of what they see day in and day out?
And I'm a health educator in Lily's section. It's Lily, great job on your presentation. She gave just a lot of really great information and really did a great job summarizing kind of like our day-to-day tasks. I will just put a plug in for a lot of the wonderful resources that we do have on our website. We've been kind of working hard to create resources that we've recognized or have had requests for from the community. So we have resources about like basically filtering your drinking water. So how you can kind of ensure that your drinking water is safe. We have resources about like PFAS in garden plants and what that might mean for your health. If you have questions about that. So I do highly recommend folks to visit our website and check out some of those resources that are available. And of course, if you think that there's a need for a certain resource that we are not currently offering, we would love to also hear about that. That's really important. So please definitely, if you have ideas, you can drop them in the chat.
Perfect. And I'm also going to have Jackie or maybe Lily, whoever can get there the fastest, to find that site that is more specific and drop that into our chat box as well, so everyone has direct access to that too. Also, if you don't know about it, if you were to go into the chat box and there are down at the bottom kind of where you would be putting your chat in there, there's 3 little dots over there. And if you click on that, there is the ability to save the chat. So I know some people, I hate to say it, but I just learned that one not that long ago. But yes, so if you want to save the chat, that is how you do that. We do have another one in here of how are they improving sites that are contaminated by PFAS? Any prevention or changes to laws going forward to prevent this from happening?
I can jump in from a site evaluation perspective, if that makes sense, Lily, unless you want to take it.
I was just going to say that you're in the site evaluation program, so you might have a better idea. Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, no, happy to help. Hi everyone, I'm Nathan. I'm in the site evaluation program, a health assessor and the coordinator. So improving it in terms, there aren't a lot of remediation techniques out there yet for PFAS. The main methods we're using, especially for impacted groundwater, is through filtration. In the short term, that's looked like getting certified filters to impacted residents, or supplementing or providing them alternative sources of drinking water, such as bottled water. Sort of shifting towards a more long-term approach, and is sort of the approach that seems to be supported by EPA these days, is getting, at least in municipal systems, installing large-scale filtration, sort of row after row of carbon filtration, which has been shown to dramatically decrease PFAS levels in drinking water. In terms of the current state of laws, at least in Wisconsin, 2 laws recently went on or are going on the books soon for drinking water, PFOA and PFOS of 70 parts per trillion, which is a somewhat high and outdated number, but is still a number on the books that will compel cleanup or action. On the federal level, the EPA has committed to getting out a draft maximum contaminant level for at least PFOS and PFOA, if not others, by the end of this year, which would potentially go into effect by next fall. I'm speaking from the water perspective because that's sort of what I've worked the most with, but I think there's a lot of action on many different perspectives, different media, soil, and air and whatnot.
Thank you. That was very informative. I'm pretty sure that answered the question. And then we do have another one of, are the companies that caused the contamination being held accountable?
I know at least within Wisconsin, there have recently been a number of lawsuits towards these companies. I don't know much more beyond that, though. That's very far out of my realm.
That makes sense.
Sorry. Yeah, this is Amanda. I can just add that you know, the Department of Natural Resources, they really are doing everything within their legal power to be able to hold these companies accountable. So when contamination, like when it is pretty much confirmed that you know, a specific responsible party is indeed responsible for that contamination, the DNR does do everything within their power to try to hold that company accountable. But of course, these processes also can take just so long, like many years. And so it's just a very long process. And sometimes contamination can stay in the environment. And of course, we're dealing here with PFAS, otherwise called forever chemicals. So they really do just stay around and in the environment for a long time until they are, you know, kind of sufficiently cleaned up.
Do we have anyone that's brave enough to come off of mute and ask any questions or give any input on maybe they have dealt with this in their own jurisdiction?
Deanna, this is Dale Grosskirth, Marathon County Health. I joined late, so I missed Lily's presentation, but I'm just curious, is there anything out coming regarding sewage treatment plants and how their waste is managed so that PFAS that gets into the waste stream or from our homes as we use products, that there's a treatment option or monitoring?
I don't have an answer. Do you know, Lily?
I was just going to say that is a very good question, Dale. If you want, I can definitely look into it and provide you more information. A lot of what I've been working on and what we've been working on is more on drinking water, but I'm sure that there's more information in terms of treatments for sewage treatment plants.
Sure. I haven't investigated it myself heavily, but I'm aware that Maine has some regulations on septage and disposal or spreading on land, and I don't remember quite what the details are, but they've jumped on that because in some instances the septage hauling, farmers are paid by the municipality to have sewage spread on their land, and it's a fertilizer as well, of course, but many of them, the farmers didn't know it, and neither did the waste haulers or municipal plants. They didn't know that they were actually spreading something that could contaminate the soil and groundwater on the farm, and has affected a couple of farms anyway, significantly.
Sure. And to kind of go off of Dale's too, one thing that I was just thinking about was all of our landfills, of if they're being monitored. I mean, thinking about if it's in these fast food wrappers, oh my goodness, that's probably unfortunately like 90% of our garbage dumps. I don't know, I'm just throwing a number out there, but yeah, I was just thinking it's gotta be everywhere in that landfill, especially once you consider all the things that it could possibly be within. And so just kind of wondering if there's regulations on that. So if you guys could maybe do a little digging on that and see if you can provide us with something that we can send out to all the membership as well, that'd be amazing. And then Whitney Johnson also said it's in cosmetics too. So it's a little scary to think that we're putting that on our faces now.
I think just a few months ago, I believe it was Amanda Cook who had she had shared with us a paper on, I think it was you, Amanda. No, I can't remember who it was, but it was a paper where they found that PFAS were also people were also being exposed to it through face masks throughout the whole COVID pandemic. So they are everywhere, unfortunately.
All right, so we are at 9:02. I want to just do one more quick round. Does anyone else have anything? Oh, we did get something in from Heather. It says, do you have a social media toolbox with PFAS messages we could share out? It just saves a lot of time if we don't have to build a message.
This is Amanda. I can answer that. That's actually a really great question. At this time, we don't necessarily have a social media toolkit. I think that's also just because PFAS, the subject of PFAS has been such a high profile, hot topic, subject matter. However, we do have message maps and things like that. So we certainly absolutely can help with messaging. And if you are looking specifically to create social media, that is something that we can also help you with. We just don't have like an actual toolkit at this time, but it's something that, again, we can help you with anytime.
All right, before we wrap up, anyone with any last questions that they're just dying to ask? All right, well, if not, you do have on our announcement that we sent out, Lily's email addresses on there, so you can always reach out to her and then she can filter it to the proper person if it's supposed to be more of a question for those site evaluation program staff. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and we will be back next month to do some more with our DHS folks. So join us for a nice little forum next month. And if you guys have any topics, please let us know. I know that at WALDEB, we did do a little bit of a survey to see what you're interested in. And we really want to get you guys involved too. So if you have a topic that you're just dying to share with people, let us know and we'll try to integrate that in as well. Something tells me this is not going to be the only little mini series that we do with DHS, but we do have them booked for this month and next month as well. So don't forget to register for next month as well. I will be sending out another announcement with the topic once it gets a little bit closer. Thanks all. And thank you to Lily, Nathan, Amanda for your guys' expertise.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you.